brother Philip. And I told you a little bit more about the history last time I was here, and I'll just sort of briefly recap that. The brothers collected a number of things, but Dr. Abraham Rosenbach's true passion was rare books and manuscripts, and particularly Americana. One of the people that he particularly amassed a really interesting collection of was Herman Melville. And one of the pieces at the Rosenbach Museum, it's actually the first piece you see when you walk in the front doors, is this bookcase here, which belonged to Herman Melville, who, if you're not familiar with the name, was the author of Moby Dick, probably most famously. He also happens to be Sendak's favorite author. And I don't just mean favorite author, I mean complete obsession with Herman Melville. He's named his dog Herman. He's named one of his most famous characters, if you've ever read the book Pierre, about a little boy in a blue suit whose only words throughout the whole book are, "I don't care." That boy is based on a Melville novel of the same title. It was the novel that Melville wrote after he wrote Moby Dick. He wrote Pierre. So Melville plays a huge role in Sendak's life. This is Sendak's portrait of his hero for a two-volume biography that he put out in the mid-90s. And there's a clip I want to play about this bookcase that I was holding back last time that I was here, because it's a funny experience, I think, to hear about an author having thoughts about the things that are in museums and libraries. And it's fun to hear what Maurice Sendak thinks about books and thinks about literature. So I wanted to play that clip just briefly. This is the DVD that I'm going to be playing some pieces from.
Good trade if I came.
Can you guys hear that?
No, a little louder.
A little louder.
On the,
Oh, okay, just turn it up through here.
yeah.
When was this film?
This was an interview. This was September 11th, 2007, I think, actually. I think there might have to be a cord that's connected to some speakers, but what I'll do is just turn it up on my laptop, and if you guys can hear that, we'll just kind of go from there.
Turn the volume on the speaker.
Right.
Oh, there's it. All right. Now his growl is going to completely engulf this one.
Left all of my pictures there that they give me the Melville bookcase. No one agreed to that. No one agreed to that. I was convinced, because the inner walls of the bookcase are papered, and I was convinced that his most private letters that his awful daughter Frances couldn't get her hands on, because she destroyed almost everything that she could get her hands on, and those letters were behind the papered walls in the bookcase. Became an obsession with me. That if I had had any time to be alone with the bookcase, I would have cut the wallpaper, and those letters would spill out.
So that's Sendak talking about vandalizing a piece of museum property. We've often told him, if he'll write the letters, we'll put them in there. But there's nothing back there right now. We've checked. There's really nothing behind the papered walls of the bookcase. It's a great story, and it would just be, one story in a long number of fabrications that Sendak has dreamed up. He's a great fantasy writer. But I think there's something deeper to this, and I'll address that again in another moment. But I wanted to start with that story because I think it'll set up the rest of the talk, I think, a little bit. I also thought I'd just briefly recap Sendak's career, in case you're not familiar with it. He was born in 1928. This is Sendak's self-portrait with Mickey Mouse. I think this is from the 70s, 1970s sometime. And he was actually born the same year as Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse was created in 1928 as well. And Mickey is one of the 3 M's of Sendak's biggest inspirations, the other 2 being Melville and Mozart. It's kind of an improbable trio, but those 3 have always been with him. You could throw William Blake in there too, but that wouldn't be so tidy, I guess. Mickey has always been another connection to his past, to his upbringing, to the movies he used to see and really loved in Brooklyn. So that's why I show this, just to kind of bring you back to his childhood and some of his own inspirations. This is a photograph of the Sendak family in 1928, just after Maurice was born. And you'll see this in the back in the exhibit as well, which has been a pretty important photograph to Maurice throughout his life. And he's taken pieces of this picture and incorporated them into a number of his books, actually. So remember the image of the little boy on the left, which is Jack Sendak, Maurice's older brother by 5 years. So just going around that group, there's Jack, baby Maurice being held by his mother, Sarah, in the middle, and then on the right, his older sister, Natalie Sendak, about which I'll play a clip later. So that's the Sendak family. His father isn't pictured. And they grew up in the Bensonhurst neighborhood in Brooklyn. His parents were both from Jewish shtetls in northern Poland, not far from Warsaw, and they emigrated to the U.S. just before World War I. While Sendak was growing up, they were trying to bring over more of his mother's family and eventually his father's family, but they weren't able to get his father's family out before the Holocaust happened. And he grew up then with the legacy of the Holocaust, and it's been something that Sendak's been trying to sort of reckon with in a number of his books. And part of what I'll talk about today is that reckoning in a couple of his pieces. He started his picture book career in 1948. A former physics teacher of his asked him, because he knew he was a good cartoonist, if he would draw the pictures for his upcoming book on atomic energy, which was published in 1948. It was called Atomics for the Millions, illustrated by Maurice Sendak, a science textbook. Who'd have thought? And if you can find a copy, you can retire well. It's a really interesting book with very cartoonish, sort of Archie and Jughead-looking characters in it. It's sort of a cartoony newspaper kind of looking book, which made sense for the time. But I just wanted to briefly pause and talk a little bit about the career of being an illustrator and what that means to Sendak. Because in 1951, when he started illustrating children's books, he was immediately pigeonholed as a sort of kiddie book illustrator. And one of the things I've come to learn over the years, just talking with Maurice and looking at his artwork, is that he's really an artist in the broadest sense of the term, and his inspirations are as broad and deep as artists in so many other fields. And I think there's something misleading about that term illustration or illustrator, and I think it's so often associated with the literal. If you go into a Barnes & Noble or something and you pick up a copy of Pride and Prejudice and it says illustrated edition or something like that, what are you expecting of the pictures in that book? Are you expecting it to just sort of visually show you what's happening in the book, just what's going on? Are you thinking of the pictures at all, basically? And it's someone's job to illustrate that volume and to think about what those pictures are going to do for you as the reader. Sometimes a literal retelling of a book is important, and that's an illustrator's job. But I think one of the things that makes Maurice Sendak so interesting as an artist is that he wants to make that job a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more interesting. He often writes pictures by on his book covers, and that's a conscious choice. He doesn't want to say he's illustrating a book. He doesn't want to say his pictures are literally showing you what's going on in a text. He's just contributing pictures that happen to go along with what you're reading. It's a subtle distinction, but I'll point out a couple of examples of that, and maybe